I love that we have friends that can sing. I heard Molly first sing that this summer, and when she did, I immediately made a little note in my phone. I emailed myself, and I put in our worship planner, this was like in July, and I made a note that tell Tim Molly has to sing that for All Saints Sunday. It just seemed like the perfect song for All Saints Sunday as we remember people in our lives and in our church and in our world who exemplify that for us. The other thing I made a note of after I heard Molly sing it, and I've heard her do that a couple of times now, and when she tells her story, she always talks about it in the most simple, ordinary kinds of ways. She doesn't talk about how she wants to make every moment to sing on Broadway or make a platinum record or all of those things, because she does have a record. I mean, do we call it a record? We call it an album? Okay. Wow, I just feel old for a moment. Moving on. She doesn't talk about having more Instagram followers than anybody else in town, or about how many retweets her Twitter has, or any of that. It's just about ordinary stuff of living every single moment in the best possible way, full of goodness and kindness and graciousness. And the other thing I wrote in the planner when I wrote down about Molly singing that song was that I had just read a blog, and it's called, "What If All I Want Is a Mediocre Life?" Yeah, don't snicker too much. She's serious, this young mom. She says, "The world is such a noisy place, loud and lecturing me to hustle more, to improve, to build, to acquire, to compete more, for bigger, better," she says. I'm quoting from this blog. "Sacrificing sleep for productivity, striving for excellence, go big, go home. Have a huge impact on the world and make your life count." And then she gets to the bottom of the blog and she says this: "What if it's not in me? What if all the striving for excellence leaves me sad and worn out and depleted? Or as people in my circle have heard me say, what if it steals my joy?" She says, "And what if I never really amount to anything when I grow up, besides being a mom and a sister and a wife and a good neighbor? But," she says, "these people in my primary circle of impact know they are loved, and I would choose them again first every time." A mediocre life. That's all she wants. Is a mediocre, slow, small, simple life. What if I am mediocre and I choose to be at peace with that? On All Saints Sunday, I almost always think of my Grandpa Charlie. That's him. I don't know who that small girl is. That's my Grandma Hazel on the right. My Grandpa Charlie's been gone 25 and a half years, and I tend to think about it less about the times like the little picture in Hazel's kitchen now, and I think about how for 15 years my Jake and Audrey haven't had the opportunity. The only way that they know Grandpa Charlie is through pictures and stories that we tell out of the Amity book. I'm from Amity. It's barely still there. That's why we have a book. 7 generations of mediocre people now buried in the Amity Cemetery. Their stories are in that book, and I always think about my grandpa. Most people would say that Grandpa Charlie lived a pretty mediocre life. Most of our family story, and he never denied it, of course, tells that he didn't much like going to school, and the only reason he went was because Hazel was there. And the other half of that story is he graduated because Hazel saw that his homework got done, meaning Hazel did his homework. And my daddy was a little bit bigger than me in that picture when they bought this little mechanic's garage and grocery store in Amity. Amity is in northwest Missouri, sort of between Cameron and St. Joe, off a 2-lane blacktop road. And they opened this little, I guess you could call Hazel's store a grocery store, because can you call it really a grocery store when the walls are lined with fan belts? And as a little, there was a big pole with a hook on the end. And he would send me in because I loved to be in that garage. Some of you remember smells of things, and whenever I smelled grease or gasoline, that's my grandpa. He'd send me inside from where he was working, and he'd say, "Sis, I need blah, 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 whatever number it was." And I'd take the big pole, because I was a big helper, and I would go in and I would hunt the lines of the store until, there it was, and I'd get it, and I was a helper. Mostly it just got me out of his garage, which was what he needed, me out from underneath his feet. It was a pretty ordinary life. And I think about him often on All Saints Sunday when we talk about the saints of the church. I think about him because I don't ever remember seeing my grandpa in the church. He and Hazel weren't even married in the church. They were married at the parsonage, the little house where the preacher lived. He wouldn't have been considered a saint of a church in his mediocre life. But I think saints are people who teach us about Jesus and teach us how to try to live our lives like Jesus-like lives. And I think my grandpa did that. There were in this little store, and it was easy at 8:30 because the store is about the size of Bonfils Chapel down there. And so there's a big counter, and it wraps around. On the corner of the counter is a little black book. And half the county had their name in the little black book. Partially because people would come in, and Suzanne would get a little something, and she'd write down that she had, a gallon of milk and a dozen eggs, and she'd write that down. And then Ella Jones would come in not knowing that her mother, Jan didn't know she was there, but Ella'd come in because Ella needed ice cream. Well, it didn't matter that Jan wasn't with her. Ella would write down in the little book that she got an ice cream. And at the end of every month, Trent Jones would, not really Trent Jones, but you know what I'm doing here. Trent Jones would come in because he's from a place bigger than Amity, but not much. Come in and pay for whatever ice cream Ella had, and popsicle that Jen had, and milk that Jan had gotten, and anything else anybody'd put on their page. And I remember on more than one occasion, somebody'd write something down in that little book, and my grandpa would say to me, "Sis, he may not pay his bill this month, but that'll be okay. Because he's got 2 little kids at home, and they need that milk, and they need those eggs, and so, we're not going to blame those kids for having idiot parents." Saints say all kinds of things. And I feel certain he called my parents idiot parents more than once or twice. They needed those things just like sometimes people come into the garage and need a tire fixed. Charlie, I can't pay you this month for fixing it. It's all right, I'll just be back in a minute. Go in the store and have Hazel fix you a sandwich and I'll be done in a minute. And he'd fix it and maybe they'd pay for it and maybe not. Maybe they spent it on cigarettes and beer. It didn't matter to him. They sold cigarettes in the store, not beer. Hazel wouldn't sell beer. An ordinary life, a mediocre life. He pitched up a hitchhiker once. I was with him on that, on 36 Highway. I wasn't sure about that. A mediocre life that seemed really mediocre to the 18-year-old girl standing in the receiving line at the funeral. Me. I was 18 years old and desperately wanted not to have a mediocre life. And one by one, for 3 hours, people came. And I stood next to Hazel and heard all about that mediocre life. One small act of kindness, one ice cream bar, one sneaky piece of candy that 3 generations of kids in DeKalb County got from behind that counter. People and stories who said, you know, your grandpa fixed a tire for me one time, and la 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 la. And there were days that I wasn't sure about that old man with grease under his fingernails. And I think about that when I see these pictures and I read a blog called What If All I Want Is a Mediocre Life, something simple and ordinary, but that every dang day, there are little acts of kindness and generosity making a difference to family and neighbor. That mediocre life probably won't get you a reality show, although in Amity it could make a really good one. And the song that Molly sings, that she sings as only someone in her situation can sing, it feels like a song about how we celebrate our mediocre lives trying to be saints. Mediocre lives of saint-like ways. A few weeks ago, I preached about St. Veronica. Some of you know that I was in a tractor trailer in McAllen, Texas, on the border. And I found myself doing laundry when St. Veronica, the patron saint of laundry workers, appeared to me. Oh, here she is. Yes, St. Veronica. St. Veronica was a pretty mediocre human being. She, if you don't know, unless she went to 12 years of Catholic school, and that was really fun, people who'd gone to Catholic school after worship on that Sunday when I first mentioned her, I said, I don't really know much about St. Veronica, and here came all the Catholic school kids. I went to 12 years of Catholic school, I can tell you about St. Veronica, I can't tell you anything else. I said, I'm going to go learn about St. Veronica. Well, I can tell you there's not much to learn about St. Veronica. She lived in the time of Jesus. And she is a saint because she offered compassion and kindness to a criminal as he was walking by her on his way to his death. Jesus. She doesn't make the scripture. That's how mediocre Veronica was. Her story is not even there. We don't know if she is among the unnamed women who regularly followed Jesus. Or we don't know if she's on her way to the grocery store to buy a fan belt, and he just happened to be walking by. We know that she offers her handkerchief to Jesus, and he wipes his face and hands it back to her. Some would argue that that handkerchief is in the Vatican, but not mine to say. What the Vatican does with old dirty handkerchiefs is. St. Veronica doesn't make scripture. She is known for one little thing, and that's it. And that is that she had a small act of kindness and compassion on probably an otherwise pretty mediocre kind of day for Veronica. So then, I didn't realize that she was about to be my patron saint, or one of them. There was a gentleman here who was here for the first time that Sunday. He's here this morning, and I'm praying he doesn't mind me telling this story. It was his first Sunday when I talked about St. Veronica, and the second Sunday he was here last week, he says to me, Reverend Shanna, I put a little something in your mailbox, and I'm, okay. And so later I found it, and it was this little charm of St. Veronica. And because I don't speak Spanish, it says on here, Donna, you would have to read it for me, but I think it says, speaking Spanish not required to live a mediocre, saint-filled life, right? And it may to him have seemed like a really ordinary, simple little thing to do. But I have carried her around in my pocket all week as I think about All Saints Sunday. Because it's saints like Veronica that we remember this day. I mean, we could get caught up in other things and people with a bajillion Instagram followers and a million retweets and fancy television shows and all of that. But I think the best use of it is to honor people like Veronica, just people trying to live a Jesus-like life, offering kindness and compassion in ordinary ways, on ordinary days. And it's also a reminder to me here, St. Veronica, that the gospel is so countercultural. The gospel is full of fear and anxiety and bigger and better. And the gospel reminds us that every act of a glad and generous heart matters. Every little symbol of love, every candle lit in hope, every picture laid in prayer, that stuff matters. It matters because, as the scripture says today, it reminds us to live lives worthy of the calling God has for us. Each and every one of us. Ordinary people with grease under our fingers and people with dirty handkerchiefs. So as we finish up our Glad and Generous Hearts Commitment Campaign, and as we head into the hustle and bustle of the holiday season, Lord of mercy, the Christmas stuff is out, y'all. Can't hardly deal with it. Let us commit ourselves to strive for the mediocre lives of the saints, walking in the extraordinary ways of Jesus. I think the world needs a little more mediocre folks. Maybe we are called to be a big old community of mediocre folks trying to live Jesus-like lives. May it be so. May it be so for us. Amen.